Hey, what out there in YouTube land? Dan here, aka the Comic Concierge. And one of the hardest things with comics is knowing where to begin. With endless years of continuity, so many series, it can be hard finding a starting point. That's where I hope this series comes in. I'll be looking at all the books hitting shops this new comic book day and picking out ongoing series starting new arcs, notable new number ones, and trade paperbacks and graphic novels being released. I'll then finish things up by picking the thing I'm the most excited about, my pick of the week. To start things off, let's look at ongoing series starting new arcs. Let's start things off in the world of DC as Infinite Frontier continues to chug along, and this is getting a new team kind of, as Jing Lun Yang did write for the Future State books earlier in the year, and those books were pretty good. I thought it had some fantastic Superman moments, but overall the story was just kind of weird and strange. I don't know, it was odd, but again, it was Future State. It also only took place in the very beginnings of Future State. Hopefully with this title, and you won't be bogged down with trying to fit it in a very small window. You also have veteran artists like Ivan Reis working with him, so you know it's also going to look great. And if you're not loving the Batman stuff currently or the Superman stuff and you want some of those characters, this might be a better bet. I know that a lot of people love Superman Smashes the Klan that came out last year, and I did as well. It was fantastic. Also, Jing Lun Yang did the new Superman title and has worked on Superman in past runs. So this is not a new rodeo for him. And hopefully all that experience pays off with a really good Superman tale. Also starting a new arc this week, well, kind of, is Haha number 3. I say kind of because Haha is basically an anthology series where each installment is its very own story, and the next issue has nothing to do with what came before, which I think is actually a good idea because there are not a lot of indie series out there that you can just pick up at any time and understand what's going on. I think that's a big key to the success of something like Ice Cream Man. It's not easy writing a full issue story like that time and time again, but W. Maxwell Prince is showing that he's got a knack for it. What's different about this is that with Ice Cream Man, you have the same artist with each and every issue. That's not the case here. This time around, Roger Language is taking over art duties, who's maybe not a superstar name for a lot of people, but he's been around for quite some time, has done everything from 2000 AD to work on Marvel titles like Thor. So he is a veteran storyteller who maybe a book like this can make him an even bigger name. And with a book like this, and often the artist is a big part of what works and what doesn't. I've been enjoying Haha. I do think those that have maybe wanted a more horror-centric title might not, because this hasn't really been a horror story. There've been these tales of just meditation on melancholy. These people just have the worst luck possible or just living really sad and depressing lives. So it may not be a book for everyone. I don't think things are going to change in here. Tears of the Clown, basically, in book form. So if you're someone who enjoys that type of thing, I could definitely see you enjoying it. But if you automatically think, oh, I love Ice Cream Man, I'm going to enjoy this, I would just take a step back and adjust your expectations, because this is not at all a horror story, at least so far. Again, with this setup, each issue is different, so this could be something completely different than what came before. It's not going to be very often where I get a book that is almost 300 issues in and is welcoming to new readers. So when it happens, I'm going to try to include it. And that's the case with G.I. Joe number 281. And this sees a Joe facing one of the most dangerous and lethal foes in their history, Washington politicians, as they have to go into Washington to testify in a subcommittee hearing due to some off the book activities that may be occurring. And this also promises to include a new character. And with G.I. Joe, characters are what they're all about. Important to note that legendary writer Larry Hama is on writing duties. Yes, the man who basically defined G.I. Joe is currently writing G.I. Joe, and I'm out of the G.I. Joe loop, so I wasn't even aware of that. So seeing that is like, oh, maybe this is something I'd want to pick up and give a try, and seeing what he has to say about the G.I. Joe in this era. For those that don't know, when G.I. Joe first started as a comic, he was the one behind it, and if you enjoyed the cartoon, a lot of the cartoon was influenced, but maybe not as heavily off his stuff. His stuff was much more adult and war themed compared to the very over-the-top cartoon. I don't know the tone of this story because I have not been reading this, but Larry Hama is actually writing some good stuff as of late. Like, I have enjoyed his current run on Iron Fist, so just because he's been around for a long time doesn't mean he doesn't still have it. So I'm gonna maybe give this a shot and see, if that Larry Hama magic from G.I. Joe is still there. With issue number 25 of Red Sonja, we see a new creative team taking over this book. And Red Sonja is a character I actually did not read much of before the last creative team, which was Mark Russell and a slew of writers, including Bob Q. She was just never a character that I was inclined to read about. But Mark Russell's name got me interested in, and I really enjoyed that run. I think it's one of the best things Mark Russell has done. For those that don't know, Mark Russell has written books like The Flintstones, The Snagglepuss Chronicles, and also things like Billionaire Island. He puts a lot of social commentary within his work, and he did the same thing for Red Sonja, but within that context of the world. And it's probably the longest run that he had on a character for what I can know. So if you're like me and dismiss Red Sonja, know that that collection should be coming out soon, and know some of the first trades came out. You might want to give it a shot. Taking over writing duties is Luke Lieberman with Drew Moss on art, and both are creators that I actually do not have a lot of experience with. Looking at their history, they have worked a lot on Red Sonja, so I can see why they were chosen after a long run wanting to get the character back maybe to a normal status quo. I will say Mark Russell left it kind of open-ended. His story was complete, so it's a great time for a new writer to come in and start a new tale. So if that continues, if it's similar to Mark Russell's run in the way it was welcoming to new readers, it'll be a good thing. But again, I don't know if it'll be as strong. Maybe for those that did not like Russell's run because of what he brought to it, it might be a good time to come back and get more of the classic Red Sonja that you were missing over the last 24 issues. This week sees Dan Mora and Mariko Tamaki starting their run on Detective Comics, and their run on Batman during Future State was probably one of the more positive received Batman titles and Future State titles that came out, and hopefully that will continue with this. Now, this is not Mariko Tamaki's first run with Gotham. She did the Harley Quinn Breaking Glass young adult series a few years ago, which I think is actually one of the better young adult books that DC put out. It helps that Mariko Tamaki has been in that world for some time. She's a very accomplished writer. Now, her DC stuff I don't think has been necessarily as strong, but it can be a transition. Luckily, she has a really strong artist with Dan Mora, who did fantastic with Future State. Obviously, with Once and Future, he's been doing an amazing work, and getting him on a Batman title like this has a lot of promise. So this also has another backup story too with Joshua Williamson, so if you're looking to read that, you'll have that continuing in this as well. I'm excited to see Mariko Tamaki take on Batman. I had high hopes for her Wonder Woman run, but it just did not click. But to be fair, a lot of great writers have tried to write Wonder Woman lately, and it did not click. Maybe there's just something with the character, something with editorial, I don't know. And like I said, I did enjoy the Future State run that she did, and if it can be as strong as that, not tied into all the Future State stuff, that's really exciting to see, especially for someone like myself that's a little lukewarm on the main title. Having a strong Batman title ultimately means that DC is in a better place. The last comic book starting a new arc this week is the Comic Book History of Animation number 4. This issue is going to focus on Saturday morning cartoons, and I'll be honest, I'm looking for every reason possible to bring up this book because I think it's been absolutely fascinating, and it's a type of comic that is extremely rare. A non-fiction weekly or monthly issue is something that I cannot think of the last time I saw it. Sure, we get it a lot in graphic novel form, but rarely do we see it released in issues, and it's also really, really good and very, very fascinating how they combine both of these worlds. I am a huge fan of animation. I love its history. I love the history of film as well, and I love comics. So in a way, personally, I feel like this book is been written for me. Each installment has focused on different elements of the history of animation. So even if you've not read previous installments, it ultimately doesn't matter because it's about history. I grew up in the generation where Saturday morning cartoons were a huge thing, and I kind of miss them in a way. Like, there's a nostalgia there. So I feel like that will definitely scratch that itch, but also get into where they came from, why they came from. This has been a very detailed, but at the same time, very entertaining read. If you read the Comic Book History of Comics, this was done by the same team. That book was all black and white, so if you're not into black and white, this does have color in it as well, because it is obviously talking about animation. One of my favorite, for example, bits of storytelling that this did was in previous issues was talking about Dumbo and how it was impacted by Pearl Harbor, and to kind of showcase that, they took Dumbo and placed him right into that battle, and it was just that juxtaposition of seeing Dumbo and Pearl Harbor just kind of, it was surreal in my mind, and I think that's one of the best parts of this. It's a docu-comic that is using the medium in an exciting way, and One of my favorite things about comics is their diversity in form and concept and design. So when a book like this succeeds, I think it's better for the medium in general. So that's why I definitely want to pick it up and remind people of it and give people an opportunity to check it out, either physically at the store or read it digital as well. It is nearing its end, so I'm sure the graphic novel will be out shortly as well if you want to wait till then. And this is also, I think, a great comic for someone who maybe is not a comic book fan, but more a fan of film, because it's packed with interesting information, but it's not just an info dump. It's done very artfully and done with a level of craft as well. Alrighty, now that we looked at ongoing series starting new arcs, let's shift gears to look at notable new number ones that are being released. And the biggest new number one this week has to be Alien number one. Marvel has been pumping this out since earlier last year. We had the Alien covers that came in variant covers earlier in the year as well. They wanted people to know that they have the Alien license and they're going to use it. This doesn't seem to take place in the Marvel Universe, so if you're thinking, oh, I'm finally going to see Wolverine take on a Xenomorph, that isn't the case. This seems to be isolated like some of their other books, like Conan started before he went into the Marvel Universe. So I'm guessing that's probably what's going to happen here. I have very mixed reactions to this issue. I'm very excited about the writer. Philip Kennedy Johnson is a writer that is getting more and more responsibility with Marvel and DC, clearly taking over Superman, now taking over Alien. Both companies have a lot of faith in him. I wish Marvel showed more faith by giving him a better artist. Salvador Larroca is not an artist that makes me want to read a book. In fact, just the opposite. I often will stop reading a book because he's on it. Not all of his stuff is obviously always that bad, but looking at what he did with Star Wars, where he took a lot of photo referencing and utilized that with that book, where it just looked unnatural. And it's one thing to use it because you're trying to make Han Solo look like Harrison Ford, but there are times where he took characters from things like Game of Thrones and throw those in there, and it was just weird experience that took you out of the book. And I have a feeling we're going to get the same thing with Alien, especially being based upon a movie. So I just wish Marvel put a stronger artist. I guess he probably hits deadlines, he gets things done quickly, but that shows on the page, unfortunately. So I don't know for a fact if I'll be reading this or buying it, but I do know there are a lot of fans out there that are huge Alien fans. I love the franchise. Obviously, Dark Horse had it for such a long time. Just be warned that you might get some art that is not the highest level that you would hope for a major release like this. Another new notable number one this week comes from DC Comics with Teen Titans Academy number one. And a big reason this is a big deal is because of this Red X character who set the world on fire during the Future State run and now is back again, or back for the first time with this run. Now, Teen Titans Academy does take place during the normal DC time, whatever you want to call that now. But one of the cool things is that we're seeing another kind of slew of these titles. Obviously, things like the X-Men have been doing it forever. You've had things like Gotham Academy. Last year, though, I think Strange Academy set up a new bar for this as well. I've been loving that series. It's been a lot of fun. It was a huge hit. I think it really hit the stride of capturing that kind of YA feel without being a pure YA title. And I wonder if that's what this is going to be gearing towards as well. So I'm excited to read this. I will say my guess is this will probably have a lot of new characters because of this Academy setup. Knowing that and knowing how speculators be speculating, there's a good chance it might be a hard book to pick up. So you might want to let your shop know and give them a heads up and put it on your pull, or read it digitally, or wait for the second print, or wait for the trade. But if you enjoy that type of storyline, if you enjoyed things like Gotham Academy, you've been enjoying the Strange Academy, this might be another one to add to the pile. Another new DC number one this week is Harley Quinn number one. This is written by Stephanie Phillips with art by Riley Rossimo, and this sees Harley Quinn returning to the world of Gotham. Stephanie Phillips did work on the Harley Quinn Future State books, and I liked that, although a big reason I didn't love it was because of the art. It looked great. The storytelling I thought was lacking in a lot of times, but this has Riley Rossimo, an artist I'm a huge fan of. Most recently did the Martian Manhunter series, and putting him on a Harley Quinn book is actually a really smart editorial choice. His style fits this character perfectly. It's cartoonish, but can be very brash at times. He's also very creative. If you've read the Martian Manhunter series, there's a Martian Manhunter love sequence that has still burned a hole into my psyche in a way that I never thought could be possible with a comic book. So putting him in a book like this is a really great idea. Stephanie Phillips as a writer is one that I always want to check out. due to stuff she did recently, like The Butcher of Paris last year, A Man Among Ye, Nuclear Family earlier this year. I've been really enjoying a lot of her more indie stuff. Her DC stuff, I think she's still trying to find her way. Like I said, I did somewhat enjoy Harley Quinn. Again, that was still kind of stuck in the future state bubble. Maybe now in the more normal DC continuity, with a better artist, she'll have an even stronger title. Marvel and DC are not the only publishers coming out with new number ones this week, as Dark Horse releases Lady Baltimore number one. And this is part of the Baltimore line. This is a continuation of the past series, although this takes place a decade in the future with a new character taking the mantle of Lady Baltimore. And this is going to take place around the time of World War II. And no, it's not a straight up, World War II tale, although I would love that. It is going to be, dealing with things like monsters and things of that nature. And yes, Mike Mignola's name is attached, although he's not the main writer here. I think, he clearly is an influence for this book because it does have a similar feeling to things like the BPRD books and Hellboy. However, even though this is a continuation of a past series, this series tends to be very welcoming to new readers, and with a new character taking place at a new time, just because you haven't read the past books, there's a good chance you'll be able to enjoy this. You never fully know, but if there's anyone that can do it, it's usually this universe. It does a great job of not being so tied to what came before, because you always have series that are taking place out of order in different times and things like that. So I'm excited for this. Excited to get a new Dark Horse series because they're losing things like Alien. They need new series to replace it. Hopefully this will be another hit on their hands. The last new number one we're going to talk about this week is Rabid World number one from Scout Comics. And Scout Comics is a publisher that is growing more and more over the last few years. This year's actually been a really strong year for them. A thing like Black Cotton, for example, was a book that came out a few weeks ago that I thought was really strong, and I'm hoping Rabid World will do something very similar. I will say I'm a little skeptical regarding this comic just because the concept is not something that immediately appeals to me. About a world where there's a virus that is very, very similar to a rabies virus. A dog bite basically sets off a series of events where now you have this virus spreading across the world, and it's similar to that, of course, probably something akin to that of a zombie virus, but more in the world of 27 days later rather than of the undead. Now, a concept is only one small piece of the great comic pie. Just because you have a concept that sounds familiar does not mean that you won't lead to something that is original or new or exciting. To me, ultimately, the biggest thing is what characters do you have to fill this world, and what do you have to say? Walking Dead came out, and there was a lot of zombie stuff, and you could have easily dismissed that, and that was a huge hit. And this may also not be in that format. I may be trying to fit it into a box that it doesn't belong in, but I'm just going off of the information that I have and why I may not be super excited about it. But again, sometimes expectations can go the other way, where you have that book that maybe you're not sure about, and then by the time you actually get a chance to read it, it ends up being one of your favorite books that week. We'll see with this. Alrighty, let's take a shift once again to look at collected editions and graphic novels being released this week. And we're going to start with one of the biggest collected editions coming out, and that's the omnibus of the New 52 Swamp Thing run done by Scott Snyder. And I will say the thing with an omnibus is you pretty much know you want it if you're going to buy it, because it's not something you buy on a lark. You know what? I think I like that book, or I think I might want to give it a shot. Let me buy the omnibus. Mostly that's one of my favorite things I've ever read. I want a collected edition because it can be pricey, and there are big pieces that would go on your shelf. They're not little graphic novels. These things have hundreds of pages in them. So if you're interested in this run, I'm not saying don't read it, but maybe try the trade, try it digitally first, and if you see that this is something you'd want to collect and own, it may be a good opportunity to come back and pick this up on another day. Do know that omnibuses don't often stick around a lot. They're not something they tend to sell in high quality, but with Snyder's name attached, my guess is they'll probably stay in print for some time. Plus, DC is known to have some issues or two when they first release their omnibuses, either missing pages or what have you. So maybe giving it some time might work out, even if you do want to buy this right away. Another collected edition coming out this week is the hardcover for Skyward. That was a great series over the last few years. I think it ended a few years ago, and the idea of this book is that Earth stops working correctly. Basically, gravity stops working, and that obviously causes chaos, but people have to adapt and move on. And it also gets into why that happened, and you kind of go on this journey of this young girl, and as she tries to kind of traverse this world and discover the truth behind why the Earth stopped spinning like it should. I thought the creativity in this was amazing. The way that they approached this idea, like how exactly could this work? You had some people who kind of loved it, especially those that maybe were handicapped before, but now in a world with no gravity, that wasn't the case. Those that couldn't let go and had to utilize technology to kind of stay stuck to the world that they knew, literally and figuratively. And it kind of went from there, became this journey as well across the world. And again, there's just this endless amount of mistakes, because one small mistake, one small slip up, and you're floating away into space. So I'd advise giving this a look. Now, hardcovers are not something that Image does a lot, so when you see it, it's a good opportunity to kind of get one of the better series that they put out. It also tells you that they have a lot of faith in that book, and perhaps it's something that more people are going to be checking out. Maybe there's a TV show coming or a movie coming, and I could see that with this story. It does scream like a great TV show or movie, the way it's really developed, and there's a lot of story there that maybe even the comic itself didn't cover. Another collected edition coming out this week is Scumbag Volume 1. We're actually getting a new issue of Scumbag as well, but that's not a new arc, so I didn't include it. However, if you wanted to get caught up, perfect opportunity with this volume coming out in a new issue as well. And this is written by Rick Remender, and it's about what if the worst person alive got superpowers, and what if Steve Rogers wasn't Steve Rogers? He was the worst person you could imagine, and now he has to save the world. How would that go? And it's been a lot of fun. What's different about this, though, is that each issue has been a different artist, which is not something you see a lot with an indie book, even a Rick Remender book. But Rick Remender does have a great eye for talent when it comes to art, being an artist himself. So this is people like you would remember, like Wesley Craig, and names that are been synonymous with any comics over the last few years. Though I know some people like a consistent look, and I will say, even though there have been different artists, generally the tone has been pretty similar. I do think the better the artist, the better the issue, and I do wonder what this is going to read like in a collected form, having so many different styles. We'll see. But ultimately, if you're interested in this title, now you can get the collected edition, and you really loved it and you wanted more, you can pick up the single issue that comes out this week as well. Another collected edition that's coming out this week is Getting It Together, Volume 1, although I'm pretty sure this will be the only volume for this book. What I love about this title is that it's just human drama. As the cover would have you suggest, it is kind of like a new age Friends. It did make me feel old, though, although the person who was writing this is older than me, but the lingo and the usage of drama, the approach these characters are young. They're in their 20s. They would basically be the Friends characters' ages. So if you did really like that show, and I would say the humor is not nearly the same level. It is not that sitcom humor. It's much more down to earth. Really, the humor is very light. It's much more of a drama dealing with relationships. And as a person who just loves human drama and how rarely we get it, there's no supernatural elements. There's no crime here. It's just people being people. I was happy to see this being released in issue format, and now if you missed it and skipped over it, want to give it a try. The art may not be everyone's style. It's a very minimalistic art, but it fits the tone of the story, because it's a very minimalistic story. It's about people being people. This is also a comic that will probably work for people who don't necessarily always love comics, who put comics in the bubble of being just about superheroes or craziness. You can show them this and say, no, they can just be about people. And if you enjoy things by publishers like Fantagraphics or First Second or Drawn Quarterly, that type of style, I do feel like that fits that mold much more than Image Comics, because Image Comics rarely has a comic like this. There's a so high concept, and it was great to see a book like this released from them and them diversifying their line. Speaking of comics that focus on human drama, you have Heaven No Hell, which is published by Drawn Quarterly and written and drawn by Michael DeForge. And Michael DeForge is not a creator I have a lot of experience with, but I've heard a lot of great things about his work. This collection has a number of different titles, all put in one, and he tackles issues like gentrification, sexual desires, and all centers on human individuals and kind of the human experience in a lot of ways, which is kind of common for Drawn Quarterly. They often put out books like this, so it should be in their wheelhouse. So excited to get this, excited that we're seeing a new slew of original graphic novels coming out. And if you were a person like me that have heard things about Michael DeForge but never had an opportunity to read his stuff, now you have this collected edition that's going to have a number of his works that have been highly regarded over the last few years. Coming out this week is I Never Promised You a Rose Garden by cartoonist Manny Murphy, and this is published by Fantagraphics. And I'm actually really interested in this, looking at the concept. It's somewhat of a non-fictional tale where Manny Murphy talks about her life growing up in the 90s. She grew up in Portland, Oregon, and was a big part of the alternative scene when it comes to things like music. Obviously, Kurt Cobain, that grunge era. But to get a little bit deeper, she gets into her state's more seedy and dangerous past, how it has been tied to things like white nationalism, things like Timothy McVeigh, how he spurred out of that area, the Ku Klux Klan influence, and getting into like how that influenced what she saw as a teenager. So I'm a huge fan of graphic memoirs and also history, and this seems to be tying both of those together. And Fantagraphics is, again, has a lot of eye for talent and puts out things that a lot of other publishers simply won't. So I'm excited to take a look at this and give it a shot. The next graphic novel we're going to talk about is Electric City, and this graphic novel seems to focus on two major things: addiction and fame, and how they're related. It's about a former sitcom star that has an accident while driving drunk. He's then freed by his more famous girlfriend, and in order to overcome this addiction, he goes through hypnosis. And it's a worthy effort to try to overcome something. Unfortunately, what it does is it brings him to what's called his happy place. And his happy place is during the 1980s, walking the boardwalk. Unfortunately, this happy place is so happy it becomes a new addiction. He's even more aloof, more unaware of his surroundings because he wants to keep returning to a life he loved, a life he used to have before he had the fame he now does, or now the fame he now wants. And I'm excited to look at this. I do like the approach of comics and how they can tackle things like fame and especially addiction, because obviously addiction is such a vital issue at all times, but especially right now in the world that we're living in. This also comes from two creators I do not have a lot of experience with Milky Way and Sean Simon, and a publisher that I've not a lot of experience with either, Z2 Comics. But the good thing about graphic novels, though, is that they can often lead to finding new creators. And because you have the graphic novel format where you're not trying to tell a weekly issue and you can tell everything all at once, you tend to lead to a better story, especially for creators that are new to the medium. Again, I don't know if they're necessarily new to the medium, but I'm always looking for new creators to find, and I do like this idea. I do like this premise, so I'm going to give it a shot. You can find it in bookstores or at your local comic book store. The last graphic novel we're going to talk about is Edward Hopper, the story of his life. And Edward Hopper is a famous painter that, even if you're a Philistine like me and you don't know his name at the top of your head, you've seen a lot of his paintings. Even looking at the cover of his graphic novel, it harkens back to probably his most famous painting, the painting of the cafe on the corner with the glass window. I know it's been homaged from everything you could possibly imagine, which includes The Simpsons and a few other things. And what I love about graphic novels like this is that, again, as someone who does not know a lot about him outside of the fact that I saw his paintings, is get the opportunity to learn more about his life. And especially painters and artists, like their life tends to be very eccentric and full of a lot of drama and interesting facts. This man who helped define Americana during a time period, and wondering, where did that come from? Where did that desire to come from? The other side of that is that sometimes a graphic novel like this can just read like a textbook, like you're just reading just major things that happen from point to point. I don't necessarily know what this will be, but I'll give it an opportunity, especially if you are someone who loves art history and wants to know more about someone's more personal take on their work, or at least more about the background of where they came from. This is a graphic novel for you. Let's get to the thing I'm most excited about, as I'm super excited that this series is once again coming back, as Bitterroot number 11 is released this week. Now, this is the start of a new arc, but I will say, although this is the thing I'm the most excited about, be warned, if you've not read the first 10 issues, do that before jumping on issue number 11. Now, the first 2 volumes are now available, so you can check those out, and I would highly advise you to do that. This is written by Chuck Brown and David F. Walker, with art by Sanford Green. It takes place during the 1920s in Harlem during the Renaissance period. Now, this isn't a true-to-life tale. This is dealing with fighting monsters in fun and exciting ways. And it doesn't just take place in Harlem. There's some other storylines that take place more in the South, but you have this ongoing battle between this family and these evil monsters that traverse the world. And Sanford Green to me is just doing career work here. He's a fantastic artist. He's been in the business forever. But this is a series that's won tons of awards. It's won Eisners, and deservingly so. And I would highly advise checking it out. And the big reason why I think is Sanford Green's art. He does not leave any waste space whatsoever. He's been doing fantastic work forever. I mean, I think most recently before this, the work he did with David F. Walker on Power Man and Iron Fist, and this is another great transition into this world. And it helps that, you know, it takes place during the 1920s in Harlem, because it's just a great time and era that is so full with different things going on. There's a lot of great inventions. It's got a great melding of new and old. It's just unlike anything else out right now. So highly advise checking it out. I know one of the big things I did last year, all these great homage covers. I don't seem that is happening with this run, which is fine, because ultimately the thing that matters is the comic inside. So if you've been wanting to check this out and maybe putting it off, stop doing that. Check out the collected editions. You like those, you can now jump on board with this third arc. And I don't know how long this is going to go. This can go on for 100 issues. This could be the last arc. I'm not sure. I hope it doesn't end, because I've been loving it since it first came out. So excited to see this, and hopefully this arc is just as good as the last. All right, there you have it. Those are all my starting points for this week. I appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully this will be a nice tool for you when you're going to the comic book store this week. So ultimately, just remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.